with means of stimulating regions of the hypothalamus and inhibiting the activity of other limbic regions. So you've got all these patterns here of stimulating down there, inhibiting here, all built around these different regions wanting to influence hypothalamic function. So amid it being a total, complete mess of circuitry, one rule helps you begin to sort out the details.
Why?
Which is, okay, so you've got this area of the limbic system, and it wants to influence the hypothalamus at the end of the day. How many synapses away is the hypothalamus? How many neurons are intervening between this part of the limbic system having something to say, getting action potentials, and influencing something in the hypothalamus? This winds up being a pretty good rule of thumb in terms of looking at influence. You send a projection straight into the hypothalamus. In other words, you are one synapse away, and you're going to be having a lot more control over what's going on there than if you have to send a projection here, which sends one there and there and bouncing around, and 14 synapses later, you're influencing hypothalamic function. How come? Well, for one thing, one synapse away, you're going to be a lot faster. And the other reason being, if there's 14 synapses in between, everybody downstream of you is going to have their own opinion about things, and it turns into a game of telephone. The most direct way of influencing hypothalamic function is to have as few synapses in your projection as possible. And thus what you see is most limbic regions have a number of different ways of getting information down to the hypothalamus, and they differ in the number of synapses, and thus they differ in their power. And what we'll see is just one example here. We'll do that later. Okay, so lots of examples of that. Just to give you a sense about something interesting in us, in terms of this rule of how many synapses away. So we've got this limbic part of the brain, and back to that rhinencephalon business. That, rodents are super olfactory, and fish do whatever they do, and again, don't tell Fernald, and all these other species have their, and we're not a particularly olfactory species. Here's something interesting. Every single one of your sensory modalities has to go through a minimum of 3 or 4 synapses to first plunk down any influence in the limbic system, except for our olfactory systems, which are 1 synapse away from the limbic system. So even us, we are not terribly olfactory, and we've got atrophied olfactory bulbs. That's a rat. Our olfactory system takes up less than 5% of our brain. Nonetheless, olfaction is 1 synapse away from the limbic system, telling you something about that whole world, that visual information can tell you a lot about calculus equations. Olfaction is the thing that flashes us back to some emotional setting. That's the reason for it. Great example of this, counting the number of synapses strategies. The fewer synapses, the more influence. So, what are the structures of the limbic system? First pass, unfortunately, it is going to make sense to learn all the details of these different subregions, because you will be hearing about all of them again. You won't be hearing about them Monday night, but you'll be hearing about them all in the next month or so, and so learn this stuff. Okay, so what's going on in the limbic system? What is inside here? What we've got are the major structures of the limbic system. Sitting in there, you recognize the pituitary, and thus sitting right on top of that is the hypothalamus, and here we have all these other regions. First off, the amygdala. The amygdala, I've already mentioned it a number of times in class. We will hear details soon about what it does. You've already heard some intimations of it. So the amygdala is this cluster of neurons, beginning to get another anatomical concept here. You've got nuclei, clusters of neuronal cell bodies, and you have projections, areas of lots of axons. So you will have a whole lot of cell bodies here, and sending their projections off there, you will wind up seeing this as a densely packed area of cell bodies. Each one of these areas